Welcome to An ADD Woman podcast, and I'm so excited. We have Kristin Wilcox on with us. She is an author and a doctor, and we're going to talk to her all about inattentive ADHD, the book she just wrote, and what it's like parenting an inattentive ADHD child. I am sure you're going to love everything she has to say just as much as I do.
Welcome to An ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy, writer of all things about ADHD parenting and being an ADHD mother on Mothering the Storm with Lacy at lacyestelle.com. Here on An ADD Woman podcast, we're going to switch it up and talk about all things to do with ADHD as an adult woman and how we deal with it. Now you might be thinking, ADHD, women don't really have that. Actually, we do. We've all just been doing such a great job for years of masking it. So let's dive in. Let's talk about everything that our ADHD touches in our lives. And when I say everything, I mean everything. There is not one thing when you have ADHD that it doesn't affect. I'm so glad you're here. And if nothing else, I hope that you take away from this that you are not alone, you are not a failure, you are not lazy, and you are not stupid, and you are definitely not crazy. You just have ADHD, and you're just like me.
Kristin Wilcox has a PhD in pharmacology from the University of Mississippi Medical Center. She has spent over 20 years as a behavioral pharmacology researcher, including studying ADHD medications at Emory University and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. She has authored several manuscripts published in peer-reviewed and scientific journals and presented her research at international scientific meetings. In her two-part book, Andrew's Awesome Adventures with His ADHD Brain, children will learn about their own inattentive-type ADHD through the story of her son's challenging, humorous, emotional, and creative experiences with an ADHD elephant in his brain. In addition, parents, caregivers, and educators will learn the science behind ADHD from someone in the trenches as they read about Dr. Wilcox's personal experiences helping her son to manage his inattentive type ADHD. Dr. Wilcox serves on the executive board of the Inattentive ADHD Coalition, hoping to increase awareness and understanding of the inattentive subtype of ADHD in children and adults. She lives in Maryland with her husband and is a mom to two sons, one with inattentive type ADHD. Hi, Kristin. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us more about your book, exactly what it is. I know that I just kind of gave a little bit of some background on it, a little bit about what it is, but can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, like you mentioned, it's a two-part book. There's the first part is my son's story about what it's like to have ADHD. And he lives with an ADHD elephant in his brain because it's large and imposing and always gets in the way. That represents his ADHD symptoms. And the second part of the book is my story about raising an ADHD son and also trying to provide some science about ADHD and how it relates to my experience with my son.
So were you mainly inspired to write the book because your background in your PhD in pharmacology and everything, but did you feel like there was some missing gaps in at least the information that was being presented to parents? What inspired you exactly to write the book?
At the time I was working at Johns Hopkins University, my son was diagnosed with ADHD and inattentive type. A psychiatrist that we were working with on the study, I talked to him about it. He was an ADHD specialist, and he mentioned to me that there was virtually no information out there on boys with inattentive ADHD. So me being a scientist, went home and immediately started looking up, research articles as well as looking up general searches on Google. And he was right. There was no information out there about inattentive ADHD in boys, no matter how I typed in what I was searching for. You got inattentive ADHD in girls, some in adults, because more recently there's an awareness of inattentive ADHD in adults. But most of the stuff in boys was combined type or hyperactive type, because what do most people think about when they think about a boy with ADHD? Somebody who's bouncing off the walls, who can't sit still, who fidgets, who blurts out answers in class. They don't think about the kid who's sitting there not doing his English worksheet because he really doesn't like English class and he doesn't want to be doing the worksheet. And he just shoves it in his desk. That's not perceived as ADHD because it's not outwardly affecting somebody else. Their behaviors are only affecting themselves.
That is so true. And I remember, my oldest son definitely is diagnosed as combination more hyperactive type. But I remember that was one of the big things that I felt like it was a misnomer with all of the psychiatrists that we met before we met our neuropsychologist. They all would ask me if he had behavioral problems. And I was like, well, no, not really. He wasn't getting in trouble at school. He wasn't having issues with like disobedience or anything like that, which were the telltale signs that they were expecting to see. And when they didn't see that, a lot of times they kind of dismissed me as like, well, maybe your kid doesn't really have ADHD. And I was like, listen, I can tell you right now, he's smart and he's having really hard time accessing his brain. So what can you tell us also? I know you basically just kind of touched on it, but what is the differences like in a hyperactive ADHD child and an inattentive, especially boys? Because like you said, most of the papers and research and everything else that's out there, even the books that are published, they talk about inattentive type a lot in girls. They talk about it in adults, but I feel like I've only ever met maybe one inattentive type boy, and he was a reader. He was very like kind of a recluse, but when it came time to do anything that was a struggle for him to learn, he had a really hard time. But other than that, I don't know if I would have picked up on that in my own child.
There are a lot of similarities. There's, kids that are hyperactive also have trouble focusing and paying attention. They also have trouble with organization and time management. The biggest difference is the motor activity. Kids with inattentive type generally don't have all of that motor activity or the hyperactivity. So the running around in constant motion, they don't have a lot of the impulsivity, the blurting out in class. They can have some of that. My son does have some of those impulsive tendencies. I'll be working on something and he'll come in and he'll just start asking me questions or talking to me. That's part of the impulsive behavior. Yeah, the biggest difference is the motor activity. There's not that outward expression of the behavior. There's all the inattentive is all internal. It's the, like what we talked about a little bit, the disorganization, the time management, the emotional dysregulation.
Yes, I feel like all the women that I talk to, several women that I talk to who are adults, are like, I didn't have the presentation of the hyperactive child because all the hyperactivity was happening inside my brain. And I'm like, that is exactly how it was. I remember being a kid and they didn't ask me, I think they asked me, did you ever have racing thoughts or do you have racing thoughts? And I can remember as a kid having racing thoughts, but I didn't tell anybody that my brain was moving way faster than I wanted it to go because I didn't know that it wasn't normal. And right. Like I said, like you said, it wasn't something that I was displaying. If anything, it actually would tire me out to where like my brain just wanted to shut off and I just wanted to go take a nap all the time. So I do think that it is definitely something to look for in your child. Definitely like your quiet child who doesn't want to rock the boat and doesn't want to tell anybody because they're just busy trying to make it out like they're doing okay. Everything's fine. So I know we touched on this a little bit about there being a large trend right now with adult ADHD and inattentiveness and stuff. And as we talked about that, I'm kind of like, if somebody were to say, especially as a man, like, primarily my podcast is for ADHD women, but one thing I definitely know that I come across all the time is so many women listen to my podcast who husbands have ADHD or they're realizing they have it, but they noticed their husband had it first after their son was diagnosed or their child was diagnosed. But like, What could they look for if they think maybe they have an attentive type in themselves in like their past? What's something that like you definitely see inattentive kids probably do, but also can adults, I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm curious as to what you're going to say. Can adults still have like that hyperactive component? Most adults have the inattentive type, or at least that's what I've been told. But can they have that hyperactivity, that driven by motor sort of thing?
They can. It doesn't manifest itself the way it would manifest itself in childhood, but generally even children that are diagnosed with the combined type or the hyperactive type, as they get older, that hyperactivity kind of goes away. So there's actually a perception from a lot of people that, oh, well, you just outgrow your ADHD. Well, no, I'm not outgrowing the ADHD because my brain is not changing because it's a neurobiological disorder, but they're growing out of that hyperactivity. So that outward behavior is going away, but they can still exhibit symptoms of impulsivity, and we'll call it hyperactivity. Say the adult who is working from home or even in an office can't really sit at their desk and work. They have to get up, they have to move around. That's the motor activity, the hyperactivity, but they're not, bouncing off the walls and running all over the office, but they have to get up and they have to move. And the impulsivity, butting into conversations, things of that nature will persist into adulthood. But the big motor activity and the running around, that will subside as, the child gets older.
You had told me when we first talked that you were also part of like a research team. And I'm super excited to kind of talk to you about this. I know this isn't exactly about your book, but I think it does talk about your expertise and how close you were to all of the things when it comes to like ADHD treatment, ADHD medication. I literally just got trolls online the other day commenting on something. It was either something of mine or something I commented on, trying to tell me that, Adderall medication or pharmaceutical ADHD medications are just meth. And that they're just that if you give your child amphetamines, that that's just so terrible for them. And I get so frustrated, but I'm really excited for you to talk about this because I know so many mothers out there who either are struggling with ADHD themselves, don't want to get on medication because they feel like it means they have to admit defeat, or they don't want to consider medication for their child because there's this misconception out there that, if you help your child get prescribed an ADHD medication, which is a stimulant, generally speaking, they're not all stimulants, but it would most likely be, that you're just going to, you're just giving up and they're just going to end up becoming addicted. So what can you tell us about the research that you did? I think you said you did it with like Johns Hopkins. Is that correct?
Yes, at Johns Hopkins. So the research study was designed to be a long-term study on ADHD medications. It's a preclinical study. It wasn't done in children, but it was designed to look at potential long-term effects of being on these medications because children are on them for an extended period of time. So we looked at physiological measures like weight and height and head size, and we looked at different cognitive measures. And basically what we found is that the ADHD medication didn't have any adverse effects on any measures, including drug abuse or abuse liability. So if you think about it, when there's a therapeutic dose of a medication, which is the one that's given to patients, there's, in the case of drugs like stimulants, there's what they call a reinforcing dose. So that's a dose where somebody would take it and they would feel a high from it. Then there's a toxic dose, which is a dose that is lethal. So the doses of ADHD medication are way lower than the reinforcing dose or the dose that would cause a high. So kids aren't going to get addicted to it. Now, there is a problem with kids who do not have ADHD, like college kids, high school kids, even middle school kids, who want ADHD medication. Well, they're not taking the prescribed dose. They're taking way higher than the prescribed dose to get the high. But the therapeutic range of ADHD medications, the kids are not getting high. So they don't have the desire to take the drug and abuse the drug. And a lot of the stories that you hear about, oh, well, they're drug abusers. And well, that's because of their risk-taking behavior. That's not because they've been exposed to stimulant medications at an early age. It's because they're risk takers. They do have risky behavior. They drink, they take drugs, they drive fast, they bungee jump, so that's what the drug abuse behavior is related to. It's the impulsive, the risk-taking behavior. It's not because they took stimulant medications for ADHD. You mentioned that some parents are concerned about putting their kids on stimulant medications. Well, for Andrew, for instance, his behavior at school improved greatly when he was put on medication. He was able to focus. He was able to complete his work. His handwriting wasn't atrocious. He wasn't getting up and disappearing in the bathroom for 20 minutes or going down to the nurse's office because he didn't want to do an assignment. So it enables you to modify your behavior so that you can overcome the limitations of the ADHD.
Yes, I think one thing for me, because for so long I felt like, and I was diagnosed inattentive, primarily inattentive type with anxiety. And I think that for so long I felt like my ADHD was part of who I was, that I was this lazy, not smart, disorganized, messy person. And what was always frustrating to me, not just as a kid, but even as an adult, until I got diagnosed, was like this cognitive dissonance of who I wanted to be, who I know I'm trying to be, and who I actually am. For me, watching my son go through that same struggle, he would come home and he would say, I want to do the homework. I want to get a good grade. I don't want to struggle. But here I was, especially as a parent, constantly feeling like, well, if I put you on medication, well, then that's just all she wrote. Especially because, in my instance, in my case, I knew that I didn't have a wholesome home life to give him at the time. I was a young mom. And on top of that, I was dealing with divorcing his father. And there was a lot of generational trauma going on in his other side of his family. So here I was thinking, if I give him a stimulant, is that just going to set him up to end up, there's a lot of relatives he has that have a drug abuse history and struggle with that. And I was so worried. And I remember finally I read an article that talked about they had surveyed ADHD kids from 12 all the way until they were like 25 and surveyed them at different times. And what they had found is that kids who had been given medication as an intervention, likely at least medication and therapy, or even just one or the other, had like more than 2 times less the risk to eventually become addicted to something. And I think that's really important to talk about because those are really big decisions to make for not just your kid, but even for yourself. And I think that as an adult, or even if you're a parent, deciding whether or not you want to get on medication, I can tell you right now, as somebody who's had to be on it, it is the difference between me being able to feel like I'm functioning or be able to feel like I'm literally just drowning. One of the biggest takeaways I take from that is just that I kind of look at it as it allows for me to shed all of those things that aren't really me. Kind of like how you put in your book, like the elephant in the room is his ADHD, and he just has to kind of find his way around it. I feel like that is so true because it really is, once you really understand what it is, you recognize that you're like, okay, this isn't me. And if it was a physical disease that people could see outwardly, I feel like a lot of people would understand, okay, you have diabetes, but you're not diabetes. That's not who you are, but it's so easy for people because they can see those things, whereas when you have ADHD or you have anything else like that going on, you just have to kind of take it at face value. And the hardest part is for us, it affects our behaviors. And so because it affects our behaviors, and sometimes it even affects our, the way that we talk to people, it can make us seem totally unlike the people we actually know ourselves to be on the inside, and it can be very frustrating. I'm so glad that Andrew had you as a mother, because I feel like moms are the number one advocate for their kids. And if moms aren't in tune to what their kids need and helping them get in tune with it, my mom and I have such at-length conversations about how she feels terrible because she has ADHD herself. And she's like, I can't believe I didn't recognize it in you once I was diagnosed. And I said, it's okay. I've figured it out. I barely graduated high school. And so for her, she's like, when I listen to you retell this story about barely graduating, I just feel so bad. And I'm like, that it's okay, because I found my resilience. And that's one thing I will say about ADHD kids and ADHD people in general. We become very resilient because we have to figure out things the hard way. All the same, she's like, I just wish that I would have recognized it so that I could have gotten you some help sooner, so things could have been easier for you. And I was like, well, it is what it is. But I think that it's so important as a mom, even if you don't have a PhD like you do, to just be aware, look for your kid. One thing I will say, and she's always reminded me, is that kids naturally want to please their parents. And I feel like as parents, we forget that a lot, because when our kid is doing stuff like acting out or lying about their homework or shoving it in the desk or going and hanging out in the nurse's office, it's so easy as a parent to take those types of behaviors very personal. And they're not usually personal. And if we know where to look, or we know the right questions to ask or what to look for, we can usually find a way to help our kid, and not just help our kids, sometimes even help ourselves. I feel like that was the really momentous turning point for me in my own treatment, was recognizing, okay, if I do this behavior, why? Why am I doing it? What am I trying to accomplish or not accomplish? Is that the type of person I want to be? And it's hard. It's not an easy thing. Did Andrew also do any sort of cognitive behavioral therapy with his medication, or did he only take medication?
He did see a psychologist for a while. He also saw ADHD coaches. He had 2 different ADHD coaches to help him get through school and, help him to be more organized and such. So he did do some in addition to taking medication. And when he was in high school, he asked to come off of his medication. And he says, well, I don't think it's really helping me. And I said, okay. I said, we'll try it and see what happens. And then about a week later, I read a study that said that older kids often don't perceive that their medication is helping them anymore. So they want to come off of it. So I said, oh, okay. But he did come off it, and he has gone through high school without it. Whether he should have continued on it and he may have done better, who knows? But he did come off it, and he managed to get through high school taking AP and honors courses. So, and he's gotten into college, and we'll see how that next step goes.
Yes.
Take it one step at a time. But back to your point about being an advocate, that is huge. And that was one of my biggest jobs, was to advocate for him and make sure people realized that he was smart and he was not choosing to be disorganized or forget to turn in homework. And, when he didn't turn in a homework assignment, it wasn't because he said, well, I'm not doing it and I hate school. It was because he genuinely forgot he had a homework assignment because he didn't write it down. And it took a while to learn and to understand that. But once I did, it made it a little bit easier to help Andrew and to advocate for him, because I understood why he wasn't turning in his homework, why he wasn't studying for a test, or why he couldn't, clean his room. Once you understand that, and you understand that it's a neurobiological disorder and they're not choosing those behaviors, they would rather do something else. They would rather do it right. Like you said, they would rather turn in the homework and get the good grade, but they can't. And they have to learn how to manage that so that they're able to be a neurotypical, which they're not.
Felt like so much of my life I was just trying to blend in, at least in the academic aspect. I mean, I was always a fairly outgoing personality, even though I'm an introvert by nature. Being around people definitely wears me out, but I do enjoy being outwardly expressive and all that sort of stuff. Did you find that in the beginning, inattentive ADHD was really taking a toll on his self-esteem?
Yeah, it does. I think that's true for all ADHD kids. They receive more negative feedback than they do positive feedback. So they're, constantly singled out because, well, you didn't turn in your homework and you didn't clean your room and you didn't get ready on time. And, they're not really singled out for the things that are positive about their ADHD, like, their creativity, their intelligence. Kids with ADHD are extremely intelligent. They have very high IQs. So they're not singled out for their, being able to face a challenge head on and just dive in. I told Andrew one of the things I admire most about him is that, we'll go to do something. We like to do crafty things and building things in the garage, and I'll, mull over it for a long time. Well, what if I, drill that hole in the wrong place or what, and he just, come on, Bob, we'll just go do it. He just goes out there and he just does it. So I admire that about him. And that's part of his ADHD. I'll do it now and I'll suffer the consequences later. But they do have self-esteem issues, which also leads back to the drug taking behavior too, to get rid of those feelings of low self-esteem, of depression, of anxiety. Again, it took a while to learn to focus more on what Andrew does well, as opposed to what he's not doing. Oh, I see you got a B on that test. Well, because you put in all that effort into studying for that test, and don't worry about the C that he got on the, essay he had to turn in, because they just receive more negative feedback than positive feedback. And people don't recognize their positive attributes and how they can contribute, because again, they don't fit into that neurotypical mold.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree. I often see a lot of times with ADHD kids, but even ADHD adults, and I know this gets talked about a lot on social media, is our perfectionist complex. And I think it's because, and I really don't have a clue, but I could guess because I know I've experienced it, is for me, a lot of times that perfectionism will it will slow me down from accomplishing something. And on top of it, I am always feeling like I have to prove that I'm smart in every aspect that I'm trying to do. And I think that for neurotypicals, praise, I feel like maybe isn't something that they rely very much on, or maybe they do. I don't know, because I'm not one. But I know for me, I was always striving to get that praise of I did good enough. And I feel like that actually was coming from the fact that I knew everything was a lot harder for me. And then on top of that, it was also because I needed it to reassure myself that I wasn't like just stupid. But, a lot of times I would sit and I would just, the idea of something in my mind had to be so perfect. And then because in my mind, I knew it had to be perfect and I couldn't make that connection from point A to point B on how to get it to at least somewhat closely resemble what the image in my mind was. I couldn't connect the two. I just wouldn't do it. It would just sit being undone because even though in my mind, I'm like, no, it's got to go perfect. But also it's not going to go at all because I'm so focused on that.
I don't know if you've heard of Linda Dweck. But she wrote a book called Mindset. So there's the fixed mindset and there's the growth mindset. So most individuals with ADHD are the fixed mindset. It's I'm good at this or I'm not good at it. I can do this and because I perceive I'm good at it. And then when I fail at it, it doesn't go well. And, I have self-esteem issues and things of that nature because, in my mind, I'm good at this. Growth mindset is you learn from your mistakes. So you say, okay, well, I didn't do so well at this time. How can I do better at it next time? So people with ADHD are very concrete. It's just, or black and white. I'm either good at it or I'm not good at it. It's hard to get them to switch gears into that growth mindset to where they say, okay, well, I failed this test. How can I do better on it next time? Maybe I needed to spend more time studying, or maybe I needed to find a friend to study with to help me understand the material. Maybe I needed to go speak to the teacher about it, as opposed to, well, I studied, so I should get an A on this test.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely been my experience. It's one thing that I try actually when I was becoming an entrepreneur and I was first starting my business. I know that in my mind, I had this idea of like, I was just going to do this crazy huge thing. And in like a year, I was going to write a book and all this stuff. And of course, like you go with, when you have ADHD, a lot of times you gravitate towards having your own business because you just don't fit in a box.
Yes.
You know, you want to create something that helps other people, because a lot of us are super empathetic, even though we don't always seem like it.
Mm-hmm.
We care deeply about everybody around us because we feel everything going on around us way more, I feel like, than a lot of our peers. We're just very sensitive to our environment. So because of all of that, we always gravitate towards creating our own business. And I see so many ADHD people get tripped over the methodology of the failure of the businesses. And I feel like that's the one thing that for me, that's that growth mindset I was only able to get when I decided to create a business, because
Right.
I went with something that I knew I was good at. I went with writing, and I was like, I'm a good writer. I know that. I know I'm already a decent writer. When I was not really failing, but kind of floundering through all of the trials and errors and time management struggles and organization and putting one foot in front of the other over and over again, it became one of those things where I was like, okay, this is not because I'm not good at this. This is because I'm not that good at all these other things.
Right.
But if I continue, I'm going to get better. And if not, I'll at least get to a point to where I'll manage enough to turn a page. I think that really started to help me. And I had a few mentors that one thing that was hammered into me, and I actually tell it to my 12-year-old now, is done is better than perfect. He actually did super good this last semester. He had all A's and B's, but I still got messages from his teachers. He's got 40 missing assignments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, tomato, tomato, potato, potato. I mean, okay, yeah, but the goal is the grade, right? And the grades are good. So I'm sorry he didn't want to do your busy work. I didn't tell him that, of course.
Oh, yes.
Avoid your assignments. You have to get these done. If you need help with them, we got to talk about it. But that's just, I feel like that comes back to, that's when I started telling him, I was like, listen, done is better than perfect. You do not always have to get an A on the assignment. Just get the assignment done. They just want to see that you did it. So just do it. I was in my 20s before I understood that whole idea of a growth mindset of, okay, this is okay. It's okay to not get it right the first time. It's okay to not be very good at it. I can keep going. I can keep learning. And eventually the wheel will start to turn. It just takes grit.
I've often told Andrew, and now he'll repeat it back to me, because going back to the fixed mindset, growth mindset, and ADHD kids think they can do everything themselves and they don't need help. They know how to do it. They don't need help. I get the, no, mom, I'm good. I got it all the time. I told him since he was younger, I said, because they have that feeling that they have to do it by themselves, because if they don't, then they're failures. If they can't do it all by themselves, then there's something wrong and they're failures. So I've, tried to tell him that people who are successful surround themselves with other people who will do what they don't want to do or don't know how to do. And so I finally beat that into his head enough where he finally gets it. I said, Andrew, do you think Jeff Bezos knows how to do all that stuff at Amazon? Or does he surround himself with people who help him execute? Like maybe he's got all the ideas to expand the company, but he surrounds himself with people who help him execute that, because not everybody knows how to do everything. So now I'll say to him, successful people will say, I know, mom, surround themselves with people who know how to do what they can't or won't do. I said, exactly. I said, so, if you need help on something, ask for help. You shouldn't be expected to do everything yourself. Doesn't mean you're less of less smart or anything like that. You need help.
I think too that again comes back to like, just like you were saying, that's all part of that black and white. Because if we really get realistic here and we really look at the big picture, even neurotypicals, nobody does things by themselves.
Right.
I mean, yes, sure. On some level, you're independent. Sure, you can get by yourself. For me, now I look at, the people like my parents who had so much patience with me as I floundered around through all my, it was a double-edged sword for them. Where a lot of kids who don't have ADHD, who are dealt with the circumstances that I was dealt with, and I've told parts of my story, and I'll get into it at a later time in another podcast episode. Parents end up having to deal with a child who's, drug addicted or in and out of rehab or struggling with something along those lines because my self-esteem was so low, didn't finish college. I had children really, really young. All those types of things can spur that on. And I just knew that really wasn't me. I was never going to be that type of person that wanted to get high. And not to say that people in general, I think they don't necessarily consciously know that they're doing that, but I knew that I already didn't like all of my avoidance measures. I didn't like the way it felt when I avoided my bills or I avoided like time or things along those lines. So I was like, the idea of, drinking or doing drugs and then waking up the next day and being like, oh my gosh, I spent all my money for my rent. I couldn't fathom it. So that wasn't what my parents had to deal with, but they did have to deal with the stress of me being in and out of toxic relationships, of me, being with people that were dangerous. I mean, dangerous for me. And I think that a lot of that understanding and like seeing how much they were there for me, even though I was like, I got it. I can do it. I know what I'm doing, that they still were just patiently, generously there. And it's humbling, when you finally get to adulthood. And I know Andrew's like early adulthood.
I was to say, hopefully Andrew will realize that about me when he's, in his 20s.
It's up to all of us.
Like, hey, wow, mom.
I call my mom probably every day nowadays. And I used to probably be like one of those people that was like, my mom's calling me again. And now I'm like, if she hasn't called me by like noon, I'm like, oh, I haven't heard from my mom. Okay. So, and it's not because, they're obviously still mother-daughter. I can still be like, I know, I got it. But at the same time, there's still like, there's this nice little nagging voice in the back of my head that I must call like mature Lacy. That's like, yeah, you remember all those years that you just thought you knew everything? How'd that work out for you? And then I just kind of go, What were you saying again, Mom? Can you tell me more? So yeah, eventually I think we shed that too, but it takes us a long time. And the black and white thing. So the other thing I noticed too, and I wonder if Andrew, and you might see this more in his 20s, I feel like it comes out more in our 20s, is our not wanting, it goes from just, when we're in our household and it's our parents, our ADHD is always about, we don't want our parents to know that we're struggling. But then what ends up a lot of times happening, or I see happening with people in their 20s, is they don't want anybody to know that they're struggling. So they end up becoming these, like, it's not even just people pleasing. Like, they'll do things just straight out of pride, that because they can't admit to their buddies that they don't really want to do that. I will say it does. It's not that you're out of the thick of it. I feel like I talk to a lot of people who say they feel like their 20s were the hardest. Having ADHD were the hardest to go through because you are actually on your own. You do start to realize
the independence. Sure. You have to figure out how to manage things for yourself, how to pay bills, how to get up on time to go to work, how to, do all of that, manage a social life. You have to, it's a lot harder once you get out there on your own to figure that out. And, I was reading an article the other day in a ADHD magazine and, saying that some parents, before their kids go to college, their ADHD kids go to college, well, they want them to have everything in order and be able to survive life on their own. And it, then the next sentence said, this is not a realistic goal, which is true. It's not. As much as I would like Andrew to go out and have everything in order. And, I know he's probably going to sleep in and miss class, and he's going to have a pile of laundry in his room for, 2 months that doesn't get done. And, it just different things like that. But you kind of prepare them the best that you can and realize that they have to take small steps. They can't just kick him out there and be like, yep, he's ready. Yeah, he's not ready. He's progressing, and he will get there.
I think that it is definitely one of those things. I was taught one time I went to a parent seminar at church I attended, and she said, you want to gravitate away from a codependency where it's like a toxic dependent on the person. And I feel like as ADHD parents, there is a gravitational pull, especially the ADHD parents that I see who only have one child. And I mean this super, because I talk to a lot of parents and they'll be like, oh, I have, well, my child does this or my child does that. How many kids do you have? One. I'm like, okay, but if you had two, you might realize that you actually wouldn't be able to fulfill all those needs for your child. And not because you shouldn't, but because you would be incapable of it, because your other child would need you also. What ends up happening is these parents who they don't really even mean to, but they just, they'll help their child pick up the homework slack. And I'm like, you're really actually kind of helping them mask their own consequences. And that's the last thing you really want to do, because at the age that they're at right now in their youth, the consequences are low. Like, yes, they're impactful to them. Okay. But they're not going to go to prison.
Right.
Ideally, I'm sure something crazy could happen. Okay. I'm not ruling that out, but I'm just saying, my son came home to me crying the day that I got that email I talked about earlier about the 40 missing assignments, because they took his opportunity. He wanted to do gym class the next semester, and they took that away, and they instead put him in basically a tutoring class. And they said, well, you need this clearly because you got these missing assignments. And I'm looking at his grades kind of laughing, because I was like,
which is actually funny, because taking away that exercise component,
absolutely,
could
be detrimental too.
Yes.
So
he needs that as an outlet, and he will probably perform better if he's put back in the PE class than a tutoring class. And that's what they, when Andrew was in elementary school, after he was diagnosed with ADHD, and I had tried to get him into advanced classes and gifted and talented program. And the assistant principal looked at me and she says, well, he has ADHD. How's he going to be able to handle course load in an advanced class or a GT class? And of course, at the time, I didn't know what I know now, or else I would have pushed her on it. But, when I'm looking back on it, I'm thinking, you're an educator. You should know that. You should know that kids like him, the more they're challenged, the better they do.
The pressure really adds to our performance rather than take it away. And so for my, now what he was given a challenge. And I said, listen, here's what I can do. I could, realistically, I could call the school and I could be that mom and I could say, hey, listen, I know that he has 40 missing assignments, but he got all A's and B's. So let's just go ahead and put him in gym class and he'll probably be fine. But I told him, I said, you didn't tell us that you were missing these assignments. So that's kind of strike one. But strike two is also, this is a natural consequence of you avoiding those things. And if I swipe that natural consequence from you, do you know what happens? And he's like, what? I was like, the next natural consequence will be compounded, which means that it might be your shot at the basketball team or your opportunity to play the next sport, because maybe you really are struggling and you need this extra hour to get your work done so you don't have to do it after school. If you're not given it, then you're going to continue to avoid it, and then your grades may suffer. Because that's the other thing I kind of explained. I said, this is the second half of the year, Jason. I said, it's not the first half where they're doing a lot of review. This is all going to be mostly the learning, new material.
Yeah.
So, and he said, okay, he was upset and devastated, and I got that. But she also told him his tutoring teacher said, I'll let you know what you can do is if you work really hard, I will write a note for you for your last marking period to be allowed to switch out and go into gym. And he was like, he took that as that pressure. Like, okay, game on. I will do it all. And it's one of those things where I see so many parents are like, oh, I got to save him from this short-term pain. but not looking at the bigger scope of things. Cause I was trying to tell them, I'm like, listen, this is important stuff. And even though this seems, just world crashing down right now, it's not really the end of the world, and it's gonna get better. And if I let you learn this lesson now, maybe things will get easier for you. And then when you're in high school and this happens again, you can go, I already did this once. I'm not gonna screw it up again. So, well, I'm going to go ahead and get this all wrapped up now. And I just want to thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm super excited about it.
Thank you.
And can you tell us just also, where can parents, if they want to read the book that you wrote about Andrew and about his inattentive ADHD and the elephant in his brain, where can they find it?
It is available on Amazon. It's also available on Barnes & Noble. And it is available on the publisher's website, MSI Press.
Awesome. So I will make sure that we link to all of those in the show notes of this episode. Just in the meantime, I'm so thankful that you're here, and I appreciate you. And anybody else listening to this, if you want to connect with Kristin again and want to ask her questions, I will put a contact email for her also into the show notes as well. And then she is inside the way we linked up was actually she joined my awesome Facebook group that is Mothering in the Storm Accountability and Support Group. It's a lot of parents that are in there, but I am all for even more women ADHDers joining that group as well. So if you want to go on Facebook and find us on there, you can find us there. So thank you so much again, Kristin, and I will talk to you really soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Lacy. I appreciate it.
That is going to wrap up this episode of an ADD Woman podcast. What did you think? How do you feel? I would love to hear from you. And if any of the things I just said are of interest to you, I'd strongly recommend that you check out the blog, which is hosted at lacyestelle.com. On there, I talk about all things ADHD parenting when you're an adult with ADHD as well, and how to deal with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear what you think, and I'll be talking to you guys soon.